Chapter 24, Worms. Shh! Hissed the voice in her ear. Slowly the girl turned round to see a face smiling back at her. Who are you? She whispered. Taking in this grubby little man, his thick black wiry hair and beard were dotted with grass, twigs and dead leaves. They were rustling in the howling wind as the pair stood outside in the dark with the sound of waves crashing against the rocks beneath them. Whoomp! Worms, replied the man. Worms, exclaimed the girl. It's me. Nickname. I'm the gardener here. I've always had worms in my pocket, so I think that's why they call me that, he said. Worms have a lovely country blur to his voice, which immediately set the girl at ease. I'm Larka, so Worms, have you got any worms on you now, she asked. Just the one, Wormy, chirped Worms. Great name, remarked the girl sarcastically. It must have taken you ages to come up with it. Worms produced a wiggly little fat worm from his coat pocket and dangled it in front of her nose. Beautiful, isn't she? Beautiful is not the first word I would use when describing a worm. Don't be like that, you'll hurt her feelings, said Worms. The gardener gave his pet worm a kiss on the nose. Well, I hope it was her nose. It's hard to tell with a worm which end is which. And put her safely back in his pocket. How can you tell which end of a worm is which? Tickle it in the middle, you see which end laughs, said the Larka. Ha ha, laughed Worms. What reads and lives in an apple? A bookworm. Ha ha. Why are glowworms good to carry in your bag? They can lighten your load. Ha ha. I can't believe you like my jokes. Oh, I love a good joke, even a good bad one like that. Oh, replied Larka, a little miffed. No one cracks jokes here on the island, and I've been stuck in this place for 50 years. Good grief, I started off here as a pupil. Is that so? Then when I'd done my time at the headmistress made me the gardener. I had nowhere else to go, but right now you've got some explaining to do. Me? Replied Larka, trying to appear as innocent as possible. Yes, you. I was just sitting there in my shed, he said, pointing to the little wooden hut at the edge of the cliff. Me and Wormy were just sharing my mug of tea, and I saw a spooky figure moving about in the darkness. I know all the children are meant to be in bed by now, so what are you doing out of your room, miss? Well, I was just going to, she spluttered, see if I could repair the hole in the roof of the library. The one the boy blasted through, replied Worms. You saw what I saw? Asked Larka, breathless with excitement. I saw the whole thing. He flew through the air like a meteor, they both said at once. Snap! Explained Larka. So I haven't gone bananas. No, unless we've both gone bananas, said Worms with a chuckle. I was in the library at the time. I saw everything. It was this boy he called Bug, the littlest in the school. Was it now? Fire. Shoot right out of his bottom. Sounds painful. Then he zoomed up in the air and exploded, explained Larka. Worms nodded. I saw the flames lighten up the sky. So how come Bug was in detention 5 minutes later? Was he now? Asked Worms. Then the gardener looked lost in thought. Maybe that's why I saw Grunt ordering the boatman to take him out to sea. So that's where Bug landed? Must have. I rushed out of the shed to try and get a better view, but you know the caretaker, sadly yes, Metal, spied me having a snoop and ordered me back in the shed. So he's in on it too, asked Larka. In on what? I don't know yet. All I know is that there's peculiar going on at this school, he whispered. Larka gulped. There was terror in the man's eyes. What do you mean? Pressed Larka. I've said too much, replied Worms. No, you haven't said enough. You need to get to bed. No, I don't, declared Larka. I need to be up all night doing detective work. I want to find out what Dr. Doctor is up to. Keep your voice down, hissed Worms. If they spot you here, it won't just be you in deep doo-doo. It'll be me in deep doo-doo too. Then tell me what you know, Worms squirmed. Oh, no. Oh, yes, replied Larka, loud enough to make Worms wince. It's too dangerous, he pleaded. I love danger. You might see things that are horrifying. I love being horrified. Worms smiled. Well then, follow me if you dare. I do dare, I do. In fact, why don't you follow me? Asked Larka, stepping on her tippy toes to feel taller. The gardener shook his head and said, because you don't know where you're going. Oh yes, she replied. Go on then, lead the way. The next thing Larka knew, Worms was leading her down some stone steps into the darkest depths of the castle. Chapter 25, The Invisible Door. Larka wasn't easily spooked, but there were all manner of horrors in the vaults of the school. Bats, rats, spiders as big as your hand. It was dark down there. Larka walked straight into a spider's web, which entangled her. "Ugh!" she cried as she felt a big, furry beast crawl into her head. Worms picked the giant spider off her and said, "Don't be scared, my little darling," to the spider. Larka huffed loudly and demanded, "What are we even doing down here?" "During the nights I've seen some strange coming and goings in these here vaults." "Who was coming and who was going?" she asked. "I saw the science teacher, Doctor, it's just two doctors, Doctor, and her assistant Grunt were coming and going. They were coming with this big potato sack over his shoulders, and they were going without it." "What was in the sack?" "I don't know, but it was big enough to carry a child?" she asked. The thought was so awful that Worms couldn't utter another word. Instead, he nodded his head. "We need to find out what they are doing down there." The pair passed through a series of cells, each one darker and danker than the last. There was all sorts of junk down there. Battered suits of armour, old oil paintings, bronze busts, rugs, even a rusty old cannon from the Cruel School's days as a castle. There was more junk, recent junk too. Classroom, chairs with only 3 legs, a battered hobby horse, a trampoline with a child-sized hole in it. "I don't think there's anybody down there," hissed Larka. "Shh!" shushed Worms. "I hear footsteps." Echoing down the vaults was indeed the sound of footsteps. It was definitely more than one person, probably 2. "Stay dead still," whispered Worms. "Worms, stop wiggling," he hissed to the worm in his pocket. As Worms and Larka stayed still as statues, they spotted the shadows of 2 figures pass on the walls. It was Doctor and Grunt had a large potato sack on his shoulders. But what or who was in the sack? As quickly as they had appeared, they disappeared from view. The sound of footsteps ceased. Ahead was a large stone wall without a door in sight. That was where Doctor and Grunt had been heading. "It was like they just vanished into air," said Larka. "Into thin air? There's no way back up to the ground if you came this way. Only the flight of steps we came down at the far end." "Because the invisible door—" "Beware the invisible door," recited the girl. "It was a message scratched on the bottom of a stone in my room." "Invisible door? I've been at school for 50 years and I don't know diddly squat about no invisible door." "Maybe because it's invisible. You've got a point there. But if it said, 'Beware the invisible door,' let's beware it then." "Boring," replied Larka. "Let's see if we can find it." She began tracing her hands along the wall, searching for anything that could felt odd. Meanwhile, Worms gave the girl a strange look that said, "You are strange." But that look changed as soon as the little fingers found a loose stone. "Look," she said, moving the stone around. "It wiggles. So does my worm. So what?" "So it could be something." The girl wiggled the stone this way and that, up and down, all around. She was just about to give up when, clunk! Like a handle, the stone appeared an invisible door in the wall. "Oh, this invisible door," lied Worms. "Of course, I knew about this invisible door." Liar, liar, pants on fire. The door was perfectly flush with the stone wall, so when closed it was indeed invisible. Beyond the door it was black as night. "Well, you found the invisible door. Well done. Now I think it's time we both got some sleep," said Worms. Larka shook her head. "Sleep is for squares. Come on." With that, she stepped into the darkness. Chapter 26. The Secret Cave. Larka realized she was standing at the top of a spiral staircase that curled down into a vast cave. A long way below her, she could see figures moving in the gloom. They were illuminated only by flaming torches on the cave walls. Larka beckoned for Worms to join her, and together they began tiptoeing down the long metal staircase. As they did so, the scene below slowly came into focus. It looked like an operating theatre had been set up deep down in the cave. Half a dozen glass tanks were arranged in a semicircle. They were just like the ones housing all the weird and wonderful creatures in the science laboratory. All the tanks were empty, except one. Bug was in it. Well, it looked like Bug, but he was glowing red and yellow like a meteor. He'd been turned into a monster. The creature was banging on the glass. It looked like he was trying to escape, but the glass was so thick it was impossible. Thump, thump, thump. In the center of the cave sat a huge metal table, which looked like it belonged to Rank's kitchen. Across the centre of the table was a thick leather strap. A mess of coloured wires snaked from the table to a huge machine. The machine appeared homemade. There were parts of a record player, a cinema projector, even a lawnmower. Bits of it were wrapped in tinfoil, others held together by rubber bands. Dangling high above the table by a chunky metal chain was something Worms recognised. "So that's where my greenhouse went," he remarked. "Shh! Shh, Larker. They'll hear us." From their hiding place, halfway down the staircase, Larker and Worms spied Doctor and Grunt busying themselves around the cave. Grunt still had the potato sack over his shoulder, but emptied it out onto the metal table. Flop. It was only when the bag was whisked away that Larker could see what, or rather who, it was. "Spod," she hissed. The boy lay motionless on the table. "Shh, they'll hear us," whispered Worms. "Oh, please don't tell me he's gone," sputtered Larker. Worms leaned over to get a closer look. "No, he's still alive. Look, he's breathing." Spod's chest was moving up and down. The boy was alive. "Why have they brought Spod down here?" she asked. "I don't know," said Larker, tiptoeing, replied Worms, "but I think we're about to find out." "Follow me," said Larker, tiptoeing down the bottom of the stairs. Worms shook his head but reluctantly followed her. There was a counter nearby which was home to a complex experiment. Test tubes and beakers full of brightly coloured liquids hummed away over the flames of Bunsen burners. The pair crouched down behind them, spying through the bubbling potions. "What are they going to do to Spod?" whispered Larker. "Some kind of operation?" "I don't know," replied Worms. "He told me once that if you get sent to one of Doctor's detentions, you are never the same again. Look at poor Bug. It's monstrous." Grunt fixed Spod down on the metal table with a leather strap. Next, he scurried over to a chunky metal chain and began lowering the greenhouse over the boy. "Not so fast," chided Doctor. Grunt slowed the pace of the greenhouse clank on the ground. Clank! "Is the seal in place?" barked the teacher. Grunt ran his sausage fingers along the bottom of the greenhouse before nodding to his mistress. "Good work, Grunt," she said. "Now for the force field." Doctor pulled on a lever and whiz! What looked like lightning danced all around the outside of the greenhouse. If it hadn't been so deadly, it would have been beautiful. Then Doctor paced over to the machine. "Ah, my monstification machine," she cooed, hugging it for a moment. "What's a monstification machine?" asked Worms. "It must be a machine that turns people into monsters," guessed Larker. Doctor put on some goggles and thick black rubber gloves and opened a hatch on the machine. With tongs, she lifted out something red and hot and seemingly alive. "What's she got there?" hissed Worms from behind the counter. "It looks like," began Larker, "a chunk of the meteor." There was a huge one in Doctor's laboratory. "I knew it. There must have been from the last experiment with Bug. They turned him into a meteor." "The school is never going to do well with the inspectors," muttered the gardener. Just then the teacher stood absolutely still and listened. "Did you hear something, Grunt? I swear I heard voices." Larker and Worms stayed still as statues. Was the game up? "Listen," whispered Doctor. "Is there someone else in my cave?" Her, grunted Grunt, which meant no. "How about you, Fiend? Do you hear something?" The cat was crouched on top of the laboratory assistant's head, opened one good eye and sniffed the air. Sniff, sniff. Larker and Worms didn't dare breathe. Fiend shook her head. "It must have been an echo," purred Doctor. "Well, Grunt, we have many false starts with our experiments, but we got there in the end. Bug is our very first monster. Meteor Man. What do we have in store for young Spod?" She paced over to the nearby cabinet, which bore the sign, "Cabinet of Curiosities." This was a tall piece of wooden furniture with what looked like 100 little drawers in it. Each one was labelled, but from far away where Larker and Worms were hiding, they didn't have a hope of reading them. "Now, where is S?" Doctor asked herself. Her beady eyes scrolled down all the little drawers until she found what she was looking for. Next, she took out a jar which had something slippery and slimy shuffling inside of it. It was as big as Grunt's thumb. "Oh no!" hissed Larker. "She's going to turn Spod into a slug." And next time we're going to be reading chapter 27, Monstification Machine.